Hi, I'm Madeline Peck, and I will be presenting on The Violent Linguist, the establishment of vernacular subjugation in Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange is a divisive work littered with pornography, graphic violence, and depravity of character. Where this may in many texts be a means to revel in the lewd, A Clockwork Orange implements these demonstrations of moral deficiency to illuminate themes of free will, violence, and ultimately the theme of control. The story revolves around the attempt to condition 17-year-old Alex, a violent bruiser and rapist, into a societally acceptable moral code. This is done through a violent means of brainwashing known by, in the novel, as the reclamation treatment. Just as members of society try to impose a form of subjugation upon Alex, however, the most complicated example of brainwashing comes through the language of the novel, the very words itself. With Alex as the narrator, his very language is brainwashing. As much manipulation and control that other characters in the novel try to impose upon him, he returns it with his skillful use of nadsat, a type of vernacular specific to the novel and the later film adaptation. Language becomes the tool of vernacular colonization in this novel, and it is through the purposeful use of language that Alex is able to establish and maintain control over the reader. A realization, then, of this subjugation forces the reader to come to terms on their own merit with their induced sympathy with a psychopath and his violent world. Nadsat is a tool in which understanding the vernacular colonization can be explored through A Clockwork Orange, and it is the key to the linguistic nature of the text. The creation of nadsat expresses the innate power of vernacular, forcing the audience to rely on Alex and his perceived higher intelligence. The novel establishes its intentions towards disembarking from common English in its opening lines. "That was me," the humble narrator introduces. That is, Alex, my three droogs, that is Pete, Georgie, and Dim, and we sat in the Corova milk bar making up our razadukes what to do with the evening. This works to convey that the old familiarity of English is gone. This is a story with a different sort of tongue. This opening line introduces nadsat with a native ease, putting the reader from its first moments into the world already at a place of narrative subjection. There is no context given for this new language, no glossary nor outside source to reference. Each new reader is accosted with nadsat without any foundation to rely on. This is a language of unfamiliarity, and the struggle to understand it forces the audience to rely on the narrator protagonist for instruction. Burgess establishes the argot of the world of A Clockwork Orange from the earliest moments of the novel. Nadsat becomes enthralled in the verisimilitude of world building, and this submersion allows for its oppressive nature. Nadsat was developed by Anthony Burgess with the intention of being a quasi-language, part English and part new invention. Bennett Vincent and Jim Kark, in their investigative approach to understanding nadsat, define it as an art language or even an anti-language. It was developed through a few core influences, the most dominant being the reliance on Russian slang, or as Vincent and Clark describe it, Russian-based relexicalization of English. This marks the majority of core nadsat, with the other portions relying on categories such as baby talk, truncations, and archaisms. Examples of this multi-leveled purposes include the use of the word ludies, stemming from the Russian liudi, which means people, and the English association of lewd. Horosho provides another distinct example, as the Russian influence is korosho, meaning good or well, but also relies on the English connotation of a show of horror. Language in this novel takes on a vibrant culture of its own, introducing further definition and connotations to words that do not exist in English as it stands in reality. This new language, however, does more than just highlight invention of language. Nadsat is used as a tool, a means of conveying the theme of control. The invented slang is used, as Anthony Burgess highlights, as a means of brainwashing. In his autobiography, he notes the reason behind embracing nadsat in his novel. He states, "As the book was about brainwashing, it was appropriate that the text itself should be a brainwashing device. This novel was to be an exercise in linguistic programming, with the exoticisms gradually clarified by context. I resist to limit any publisher's demand that a glossary be provided. A glossary would disrupt the programming and nullify the brainwashing. The very use of language establishes a level of control. By nature of this work being a novel, language is how the story is being communicated. The reader is completely reliant on words on a page. This grants a power towards the perspective of the novel, and the perspective of this novel is Alex's. The book takes the further step of acting like a dialogue between Alex and the reader. He frequently works to invite the reader in, calling them, "Oh, my brother," just as he would any of his droogs, and engaging in a conversation with the reader. Added to this is the narrative disadvantage that the reader does not fully understand Nadsat. Alex then is not just narrator, he is also translator. A reliance is built on him in order for the reader to understand the proceeding of events in the story. They require Alex to provide context to Nadsat, and it is this relationship that Alex implements and utilizes so that he has a firm linguistic control over the reader. The major event of the novel revolves around a more explicit form of brainwashing that Alex is forced to undergo as society works to conform him into a more acceptable standard. Nadsat and this physical conditioning demonstrate parallel methods of brainwashing and their intensive effects. As much as Alex uses language as a purposeful brainwashing towards the reader, it is also used in the text against him. This is demonstrated in the introduction to the reclamation treatment. As Alex serves his time in prison for the murder of an older woman, he undergoes this conditioning to help him change from rebellious youth into upstanding member of society. This conditioning includes being forced to watch films, or viddy films as Alex would refer to it. And here we get an example of the linguistic gymnastics utilized in the text. Alex states, as the nature of the films is being kept secret from him, "This must be a real horror show film, you're so keen on me videoing it." In this context, the use of the word horror show relies on the Russian association, meaning good. The technician, however, replies with the English association of the word. "Horror show is right, my friend," he states. "A real show of horrors." The film begins and it consists of an older man being jumped and bludgeoned by a group of young men. Alex describes it as a pleasurable experience watching this film, even going as far as describing the experience as being akin to watching a dirty film, associating sexual pleasure with the graphic violence that he explains in vivid detail. This all changes, however, as Alex is watching an overly pornographic film next. The vitamins which he was given before the showing start to make him feel incredibly sick. As Alex gets more and more sick, the films continue and he is forced, with his eyes held open, to watch each and every one. The violent, pornographic sequences that he would typically take great pleasure in are now being accompanied with intense pain and sickness. The films of the reclamation treatment continue, and Alex is being forced to associate everything that he once took gluttonous gratification in, and which the good and the state have deemed morally reprehensible, in a Pavlovian fashion, to intense bouts of sickness. This conditioning is textually returned to the readers. The theme of brainwashing is renewed, but some significant token elements are recycled as well. As the chaplain introduces Alex to the conditioning before he undergoes it, he refers to himself as the lowest and humblest of God's servitors. Alex lifts and uses this phrase throughout the story, calling himself the humble narrator. He introduces his own form of brainwashing. Both scenes mirror the other, though through a subtle lens. Just as Alex is then forced to watch intense scenes of violence, the reader, through the story, has already undergone a similar experience. The events of the novel have already included intense violence, rape, including the rape of two 10-year-old girls by Alex, and murder. The motivations behind each of the brainwashings, however, is what is distinctly different. The purpose of the reclamation treatment is to make Alex less violent, less sexually abhorrent, and more befitting of a characterized upstanding citizen. Alex, however, uses brainwashing on the reader as a means of subjecting them into empathy and even, at times, sympathy with him. What is demonstrated by the end of the novel is, however, that Alex is the more superior one at his craft. Alex uses his specific variation of Nadsat in order to develop control over his droogs and the society around him. His use of language is precision. He delves into the specifics of dialogue in order to characterize himself as something greater than society, than his followers, and even, it seems to imply, than the reader. His accomplishment of subjecting the reader under him is even more impressive due to his complete alienation from the typically portrayed hero. Alex is not the usual protagonist. He is violent and vile, decadent and dangerous. Despite his moral ambiguities, or more accurately, his complete irregard to moral conduct, the novel still places him at the narrative center. Because of this, his use of control through language is a grand accomplishment. Alex has a complete and specifically violent use of language that he uses around both his droogs and figures authority encounters. He is violent by all definitions, but the novel is still able to align the reader with Alex. The dynamic between power and language is revealed as the readers find themselves under the control of Alex as well, just as much as any of his droogs or victims are. Just as Alex is set apart from other characters in the novel, he is set apart from the reader. His distinctive control of the language is combined with his narrative power, forces the reader to rely on him for clarification. Specificities of language are used to further accentuate Alex's use of language for control. At moments of power, Alex refers to his droogs as, "Oh, my brothers." This develops into one of his most common sayings, leaching into his vernacular as a sort of primal feature. Each reaffirmation of "Oh, my brothers" reminds the droogs of his place, with Alex as their humble leader and them as loyal followers. This sort of dynamic, however, becomes paralleled by the relationship of the reader with Alex. His first uses of "Oh, my brother" are directed to the reader. He equates the reader in the same position of his droogs, in a position subservient to him. Alex makes no distinction between his droogs and the reader. Each are merely something to be persuaded and to be controlled. Alex's impressive, albeit strange, use of language requires and demands the reader's attention. It forces a level of engagement into Alex's every word in order to be comprehended. The reader is forced into dependence. They require Alex, their humble narrator, to explain the events of the story, but this allows Alex to take full control over the view in which the reader sees it. Every bit of power that Alex gains throughout the novel is through his careful use of language. His ability to use language to subject people to his will is how he obtained and maintained his sort of power for the length that he did. When needed, he coupled a word with a fist, but it is not primarily the violence that stoked his power. It is his ability to place others as secondary to him through his overt use of vernacular. This form of novel replicates the content of it. A novel about brainwashing and control, it uses both against the reader. Alex's sophisticated use of developed vernacular nadsat is what allows for the reader to be controlled and subjected under Alex's careful influence. A Clockwork Orange's greatest power is its manipulation of the reader, placing them as the subjugated party and Alex's violent tirade. Language in this novel is control. Alex, who was at a time a victim of brainwashing in the events of the story, takes elements borrowed from this conditioning and applies them in a linguistic manner to his relationship with the reader. They become dependent on him through their lack of understanding of this new, strange nadsat, and this dependency becomes subjugation. Alex is a violent linguist, and Anthony Burgess' A Clockwork Orange demonstrates the ability of vernacular to form a sophisticated subjugation. Thank you.